Welcome to our GAT Labs webinar on securing the cloud, a deep dive into Drive security and compliance for Google admins, hosted by Liam Doe.
First of all, thank you very much for joining our session today. We're very happy that you're interested. Today the topic is securing the cloud, deep dive into Drive security and compliance for Google admins. So a quick intro for me. I'm Liam Dow. I look after the enterprise accounts here at GAT Labs. So I am relatively new to GAT Labs. I joined sort of towards the end of last year. But I have been working, with Google Workspace customers for a number of years, going back to 2015, I think. So, I've helped customers move from legacy platforms or Microsoft Office into Google Workspace, and also worked with like existing customers that might have been on Google for a long time, and always in kind of like a technical consultant kind of capacity. One of the key areas, obviously, as part of that, is helping customers to, kind of understand security, in respect to Google Drive. Obviously, Google Drive is one of the, really one of the most widely used parts of the product, alongside Gmail. I'm hoping that today, you'll maybe learn some kind of insights or things that you can do to help protect your workspace environment, and also really some of the risks that exist today, in general around data security, but also specific to Drive itself. So just to kind of cover a few housekeeping kind of things, the session is going to be around 40 minutes long or so. We will be doing a few polls throughout the session. So you should see these pop up on your screen once we get to those. So I'll go to a slide, there'll be a question, and then you have a pop up with some multiple choice answers that you can select. And really they're just a bit of fun, but I am interested to see kind of what answers we get. In terms of any questions that you might have, there is a chat in the bottom right hand side that you'll see. So I am here by myself, but I'm joined very much by my team as well. They are active in the chat there, and they can answer any questions that you might have. And also, at the end of the session, once we've finished up, we'll be sending out kind of like a follow-up, with a bit of a recap document as to the topics we've covered. And you're very welcome to reach back out to us. If there are any particular questions or thoughts that you might have, we'll absolutely pick those up. And then the last thing just to cover is that, I'd encourage you to stay throughout the whole session. At the very end, we do have something that we hope will be of interest to you, kind of a little thank you for joining, but, it's also something that's going to be able to help you across all the topics that I'll be talking about today. So, yeah, without further ado, I'll kind of start. So in terms of the agenda, really the first few sections are going to be talking about some kind of, like industry insights, really. So, Google Drive's popularity, how much it's grown, over time. And then we've got some really interesting kind of data points that we pulled from a variety of kind of industry reports around data breaches. So, I think that will help to really, I guess, give you a picture of what the landscape is like today, what some of the risks are. I'll touch on some of the legal implications and responsibilities that organizations have in the realms of data security, and then I'll talk about both internal and external file sharing risks in the context of Google Drive. So I think often customers you're focused mostly on maybe like external sharing permissions, who externally has access to my data. But internal file sharing permissions is very much an important part as well, and some of those data points that I'll talk about really kind of speak volumes to that. And then we'll go into what you can do. What solutions are available to you as an admin. Now I want to highlight that we'll be talking about features that are available natively within Google Workspace. Albeit this is a GAT Labs webinar. We do want to provide really actionable recommendations that really any Google Workspace customer can do to help secure their environment. That said, it is a GAT Labs webinar, so I will be ending it with some of the tools that we have available that can really help to cover a lot of the areas that we're going to go through today. And yeah, as I say, at the very end, I will be touching on something that I hope will interest all of you. and can help you to secure your environment. So yeah, Google Drive's popularity and risks. So it's been about, I don't know, I think 15 years or so since Google Workspace has, kind of started. And, in that time, the number of organizations that are moving to Workspace has really grown and just continues to grow. And really, kind of some of the stats we have up here speak volumes to that. So, 31% of the market share for SaaS cloud storage, collaboration platform, it's kind of dominated by Google Workspace. So, it's a very widely used application. And there's over 2 billion active monthly users that use Google Drive. Now, of course, that number also includes consumer accounts, not necessarily organizations or workspace domains, but it really shows how widely used it is as a platform. And I think whenever any product has wide adoption, is used, very widely, it increases the likelihood that malicious actors are going to target those users, particularly when it's related to storing data. Many people are using Google Drive to store, very confidential information. So with that growth, it has meant that ultimately, there are malicious actors out there that are trying to, phish people through it, or compromise accounts to be able to steal that data. So very much a growing threat as well in that space. And then one of the other kind of things around Google Drive, and it's a new challenge for admins when you kind of compare it to more traditional legacy file shares and kind of what existed previously before the kind of move to the cloud. So in terms of like the methods that data could be leaked out of your organization, admins were mostly focused on ensuring that the server room was safe and secure and it wasn't connected to the internet, and tracking who's printing things and making sure that people don't leave things on a train or a bus. So ultimately it was really just attaching things to emails, pressing send, and that was kind of the main risk in terms of your files and your data leaving your environment. Whereas now, obviously one of the benefits of Workspace is that anyone can really share files with other users. You can all work on it at the same time, but it does open up, a lot more challenges for admins, because it's harder for them to have visibility over everything that's going on. Particularly if they have a very active user base or a large number of users, it can be challenging to actually see and understand what data, for example, is shared publicly or is available to people that aren't members of your organization. So yeah, lots of benefits with Google Workspace, but it really has brought about, a number of new challenges that some IT teams are still struggling to kind of deal with. So yeah, as I mentioned, we've pulled some kind of interesting stats, primarily from Security Magazine and Verizon's 2023 data breach report. So Verizon, they do like an annual kind of report. It's very lengthy, but they kind of consult with a lot of organizations that are at threat of being hacked or kind of the targets of data breaches, and also those organizations that actually did have a data breach in that given year. So it's very interesting stats that are kind of there, and as I say, it is an annual thing that they do. So yeah, on this left-hand side column, this is some of the responses that they had from organizations themselves. So 76% of organizations plan to increase the data security resources, and almost half of them have increased the talent budget within that space. So I think it speaks volumes to the fact that organizations see this as a key area to invest in. It's a growing threat, and an analogy that I like to use is it's kind of like an arms race. Ultimately you can design and use what are best practices and implement really strong security controls, but there's always someone out there that's trying to find the holes in it. They're trying to develop exploits, and eventually they will find methods to be able to get through whatever security you've developed. So it's a process of constantly kind of competing against each other and trying to always focus on your security. So it's an ongoing area, and yeah, very much something that organizations need to continue to be focused on. This middle column, so this is some kind of responses from employees themselves. So 65% of IT pros have reported that they have accidentally shared files internally. Sorry about that. I shouldn't have gone forward there. So yeah, I'm sure lots of people in the audience joining today, you work in IT. We're not infallible. We can make mistakes as well. It is very easy to put the wrong person into the to field or the CC, or maybe you drop a file into a chat space and you realize, oh no, there's other people in here that maybe shouldn't necessarily see this file or have access to this file. So even IT pros can make these same mistakes. And then 72% of departing employees, they'll take company data when they leave. And I think that's a really important stat. And for some organizations, that's a massive risk. If you're working in a very competitive landscape where potentially there's like a salesperson that could potentially take customer lists, customer contracts, lots of really sensitive information from your organization when they leave and take it to a competitor, or even if you're developing your own IP, you've got your own software, maybe a developer could take some of their the code base and use that as a basis to start their own competitor. So it's one of the challenges that with everything being digital and more people working from home, this risk is really only going to grow as well. And I guess that this one is related to when I'm speaking about internal file sharing risks. It's something to be conscious of. And then on the right-hand side, so this is an interesting stat: 40 to 60% of small businesses never reopen after a significant data loss event. And I was thinking about this stat when we kind of pulled this up, and obviously the context here is small businesses, but I would go as far as to say that I think pretty much most organizations, they're going to have either some data or an application, a service that if the data was suddenly stolen or lost, or is all encrypted by some ransomware attack, it's going to really make it difficult for them to continue to operate going forward. So I think if you were to think about your own business, I'm confident that there's probably different platforms that you use or different sets of data that you have that suddenly you woke up one day and they weren't there. It would be very challenging for your business to continue to operate. And then lastly, so those of us in the audience that are based in the EU, or really anyone that operates within the European Union is probably aware of, but in 2018 the GDPR regulations kind of came into force, and the fines for breaching those regulations can be up to 4% of the annual global sales for non-compliance. So ultimately it scales with the business. Whether you're small or large, 4% is always going to be a meaningful amount. So investing into data security is always going to pay dividends. Ultimately it's something which the consequences of not doing it can be quite broad. And yeah, you might get a sneak peek there. I think it accidentally moved onto this slide, but this is our first poll. So yeah, you should see that pop up on your screen now, and it is what was the largest fine for a data breach. So I will just wait a few seconds for kind of everyone to submit an answer there. And I can see we are getting a few votes coming through. Okie doke. Right, so we've got quite a lot of votes come through so far. I hope none of you have been Googling, because ultimately it does ruin the fun a little bit. But happy to say the highest voted answer, 1.3 billion euros, that is spot on. So that is correct. So that was Meta, Facebook's kind of parent company. They were fined 1.3 billion euros, which is the largest fine to date, kind of related to data security. This was obviously specifically to GDPR non-compliance, but I think it shows you that what I was saying, regardless of the size of your company, those fines, the consequences of kind of not treating data security in the right way can be really large. So yeah, I mean, what can you do as a business to help protect yourself? So look, I will be touching on specific areas within Google Drive, specific things you can do to help secure your environment, but really it comes down to kind of two things. Is that 43% of businesses that had a data breach, it was due to not having visibility into the system that was compromised. So it's primarily because they weren't aware that something was happening. That's why that data breach occurred. They weren't monitoring the system. They weren't able to see what was happening. And then being proactive. So kind of treating data security as a priority. If investing in proactive safeguards, whether that's software, staff, resources, towards data security, it's going to reduce the risk by up to 70%. So really, I think that's the main things you got to keep in mind, is that you need to ensure you've got visibility of the things that are happening, in your environment, and you need to take a proactive approach. And if you do both of those things, it's going to do a lot to really protect you. So on to some internal drive security risks and some tips as well around it. So namely, the main thing when it comes to internal drive security is unintended exposure. So people having access to content that they shouldn't have access to, or they don't necessarily need to have access to all the time. So that is going to be the kind of largest risk that you have in your organization. And really kind of the way Google Workspace and Google Drive kind of works is that naturally over time, things slowly become more and more shared out. And I would say, I think if you've been at an organization a long time, the likelihood is that you have access to a lot of stuff in Google Drive that maybe someone who started 3 or 6 months ago doesn't have. So over time, you will start to get more and more data. So what can you do about that? It is primarily auditing. So knowing what you have, what permissions have been set. As I say, the visibility side of things is a key part. But rather than also just kind of taking solving problems retrospectively, you want to be able to stop things from happening in the first place. So having actual strict settings in place within your Google Drive environment is going to prevent that from happening as well. So if somebody does move from one team to another, having processes or workflow automations in place that can immediately remove certain sharing permissions that they have access to because they've moved a job. So those kind of things. And risk of data loss. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware that within Google Workspace, if someone leaves your organization and you want to retain their data, and that's often going to be the case, whether that's for regulations, you need to keep that data, or simply just kind of out of a need to not impact the rest of your workforce. As you'll know, just because I own a file doesn't mean it's the most important to me. It could be many people that have access to that file and regularly use that day in, day out. And obviously one of the challenges as well is around the cost of licenses. So, when someone leaves your organization, obviously you can suspend their account. There's many things you can do to secure that account. But if you want to retain their data, you're going to have to keep that user licensed. And whether that is a full license or an archive user license, there's always going to be a cost attached to that. So, it depends on your organization. But if you are in a large organization with high attrition, that cost can mount up really quickly. So having protocols in place to deal with leavers' data in a secure manner and a scalable and kind of automated manner, ideally, to transfer ownership of their files to whether that is a kind of like a holding account, to their manager if appropriate. But defining those processes and having those in place is going to do a lot as well to prevent really the chance of losing any data during people leaving your organization. And then last but definitely not least, reviewing default settings. So I kind of spoke to the fact that Google Workspace, it's a collaboration platform. Ultimately, that's what it's there for. But out the box, it's a very open kind of configuration. So by default, users are able to publish things on the web, and they could be searchable via Google Search or any other kind of search tools. And one which is often kind of overlooked as well is group settings. So by default, if you create a Google group, even if you only add 3 or 4 people to that Google group, any user in your domain can go to groups.google.com, and they're going to see all of your groups listed there. And they'll be able to access those groups, and they can see all of the content, all of the emails that have been sent back and forth, going back to the start of that group. And they can also add themselves to the group as well. So this is quite a large risk, really, because Google Groups can be used to, firstly grant access to different Google Drive content, different files. As I say, it could also have lots of email history in there as well. But if you are a customer that also uses Google Cloud, Google Cloud Platform, groups are kind of the recommended option for identity and access management. So what I mean by that is, if you have a website that you have running in Google Cloud or any kind of service running there, if you do have the default settings applied to your Google Groups, then think of a scenario where someone's account is compromised. They would be able to go to groups.google.com, and then they could add themselves to all of these different groups, and that would be elevating the access they have to Google Drive content, to all of this email content, but also potentially opening up the risk that they now have access to your GCP environment. So, I think it's one that could be overlooked sometimes, group settings, but it is one which is very important to look at. And yeah, as well, out the box, users will have access to the Drive SDK, which is effectively the Google Drive API. No user really needs to have access to the Drive API. Maybe you have some developers, and there's a reason that they have access, but ultimately by default, the vast majority of the time, your users aren't going to need access to that. It could be used to execute some like mass downloads of data or mass sharing events. So yeah, very important to review your default settings. And yeah, whilst doing that, consider the principle of least privilege. So I will speak about that on a further slide, but really it's just about making sure that people have access to only the files, the data, and the services that they need to have access to do their job. Again, as I say, it's about preventing, if somebody does have their account compromised, preventing the scope of access that that person has. If it is only the certain things that they need to do their job, then hopefully the impact of that happening would be vastly reduced. So I think we've got another poll here. So this is, what percentage of data breaches are due to human error? So again, I will just check and see how many responses we get through. So I can see them coming through. I'll just give it a few seconds. Okie-doke. So we're getting quite a lot. So we either have a very educated audience, or potentially maybe some people Googling as well. But either way, I'm happy to see that again, the top response is the correct answer here, and it is 88% of all data breaches are due to human error. So I guess to expand on that, it's not necessarily that people are just continually making mistakes, and sharing out data and things. Obviously that is a component of it. It is people accidentally sharing content, but it could be someone misconfiguring something. Maybe they believe that they have set up certain policies, rules, settings to the right way, but ultimately maybe they've left a gap there which could be exploited. And also like phishing, people being kind of tricked into sharing data. Often, phishing attempts can be, very convincing, and that is a frequent way that people end up, giving access to their account or sharing files and content out to someone that shouldn't have access to that data. And yeah, in terms of like sharing content externally, really the main thing to be aware of is it's a loss of control. When data's within your own environment, ultimately you control who has access to that. You can kind of control what your users are doing a lot more than someone who's external. Once someone externally has access, they could potentially share that onwards, or they could print or download, if those settings are allowed. Or they can simply just copy and paste things or take screenshots of content as well. So there is a degree of trust involved. Once content has been shared out externally, you do need to trust that recipient's going to treat that data sensitively and kind of follow the best practices themselves. And yeah, kind of going back to what I was saying, ultimately you want to be able to audit these events, kind of retrospectively look back and make sure that those sharing permissions are still valid, but also just having the strict policies in place in the first place will prevent, oversharing, which shouldn't occur. So yeah, as I say, I will be touching on some settings that you can apply within your workspace environment in just a moment. And the other risk to be aware of, so obviously there's your own content, sharing that out, but one to be aware of is people sharing content into you as well. So kind of talking about the new challenges that exist within kind of moving to the cloud, adopting Workspace, a kind of novel technique that some hackers, malicious actors out there are using to compromise people's accounts. They will register a domain, and maybe that domain name sounds very similar to like a partner company or like a one of your vendors, someone that you have a legitimate business interest with, and they could register a Workspace environment, pull someone's profile picture from LinkedIn, and create a very convincing profile, and then they could create a file in Drive, share that with some of your users, and your users would receive a legitimate email notification which says, this user has shared a file with you, have their name, their profile picture, and when they access that file, it could contain links which might bring them to a spoofed Google login page, where they then end up kind of giving away some of the kind of the passwords, the credentials, or it could download software to their machine which contain viruses or ransomware that could then proliferate across your network. So it's another one to be aware of, really, is that ultimately, again, by default, if you're enabling external sharing permissions, you're also allowing content to be shared into you. So it's something from kind of like an end user education piece that you really need to be aware of, and let your users know that they can't just implicitly trust because it has come from Google, because it looks like a legitimate sharing permission, that maybe it isn't the person that they claim to be. So on to some solutions for you guys. So in terms of what can Google Admins actually do, so the next slide I have is kind of some specific settings that I wanted to highlight, but these 4 things are really the main things that you need to be thinking of. So the principle of least privilege, again, just talking about the same topic I mentioned before, but this is something you need to be applying. It goes beyond Workspace and Google Drive, but really across your entire IT estate. People should only have access to the data, the services that they need to have to do their job. And if someone needs access to something once a year to do a certain activity, then ultimately they should only have access for that time period. So that is the best practice, and doing that will prevent when a breach does happen from it being a really large one. Robust two-factor authentication. So yeah, passwords just aren't enough these days. You can educate your users and say, please don't use your Facebook password to log into your company account. But ultimately, users are still going to do these kind of things. It's very difficult to prevent that type of thing from being done. And password rotations, which some companies might have in place where they'll rotate passwords every month. That is certainly there are benefits to doing that approach, but without two-factor authentication, you're still open to the risk that even though they've changed their password recently, someone could still be hit by a phishing attack and end up giving their credentials away. Whereas with two-factor authentication in place, even if somebody does have the password for one of your users, they're not going to be able to log into the account. They'll try, and then they won't be able to get past that second factor of authentication. Regular security audits. So yeah, I had touched on this a little bit before, but yeah, conducting regular security audits is really important to do. You should do that at least once a year, if not much more regularly. And I think you can spend a lot of time configuring all of the right policies, putting the right controls in place, but what you've configured on a given date might be very different for what you need to have set 12, 24 months later. Things change, and maybe it's just that the risk profile of your organization has changed, or maybe it's that there's new settings, there's new features available. You're not making use of the most secure approaches to really secure your users and the data. So yeah, conducting regular audits is always going to pay dividends there. And last but definitely not least, training and awareness. So we mentioned 88% of data breaches are due to human error. The best thing that you can do is to just train your users, make sure that they are aware of how to use the software, what they should be doing, how to share data out from Google Drive in a secure manner. Ultimately, it's very easy if you are in IT to maybe assume that people just know how to use these tools. A lot of people do have Gmail accounts these days, but there are certainly people out there that may have only ever worked in more traditional Microsoft environment, and they've joined your organization, and they may not be very familiar with how to use Google Workspace. So doing training during onboarding, but then also regular training and kind of information security awareness sessions with your entire user base is very important. As I say, it is one of the biggest risks, really, your end users. So making sure that they feel that they know how to behave and when to report if something has gone wrong, that's going to help a lot. Okay, so in terms of some actual settings that you can configure, what you can do to protect your environment. So the first one here, it's not necessarily directly related to Google Drive settings, but it's going back to securing Workspace accounts. That has got to be one of the most important things for you. So enforcing two-step verification for all of your users, and note the word enforce and not enable. Enabling two-factor authentication, it provides the option for users to enroll, but it doesn't force them to enroll. So users could hypothetically disable the two-factor authentication, and ultimately then you've lost all of the benefits that you have there of if someone does have their password leaked out in the wild. And then consider the advanced protection program for particularly sensitive accounts. So this is it's maybe not that widely known feature within Google Workspace, but this is something you could enable for maybe like your CFO or your CEO, very senior people in your company, or maybe if you work in like media and you've got journalists or maybe even celebrities where they potentially are going to be targets for people to try to access their account. Google provide this additional layer of protection that you can enable. And what this will do is it will prevent them from being able to log in with regular 2FA methods. So they won't be able to have the SMS message. They won't be able to use the Google Authenticator app. that they have to use a YubiKey. So that's like a device that would be provided to them. They can just put into their machine and put their finger on it, and that that's that second factor of authentication that lets them log in. So yeah, it's a more secure method. Ultimately, you need this device to be able to log into the account. It also prevents them from, kind of when you go to certain websites and you'll see the sign in with Google button, and you sign in, and then you get the pop-up, and it's telling you all of these different scopes that it wants to have access to, and you can click allow. It will prevent them from accessing certain services. So if they're trying to access one of those kind of SaaS apps which does want access to all of the Google Drive data, it won't allow them to do that. And again, it's extra protections that you can put in place for those really sensitive accounts to prevent data being leaked. And then implementing shared drives. So if you're a long-time Google Workspace customer, you're probably aware that shared drives they weren't always a thing. They're relatively new, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years or so. So historically, all data would be in my drive, and a lot of customers that have been on Google a long time, you're probably familiar with how things used to work in terms of sharing data. You'd probably have someone important in the company or like a service account that you would use to create a top level folder, and then lots of folders below that, and just add everyone there. And it becomes really difficult to maintain. And from an audit perspective, it is a nightmare, because ultimately there's hundreds of different people owning files, lots of different settings for every single individual file, some inherited, via different folders, and it becomes really difficult to be able to get a picture of how secure all of that data is. So using shared drives, you're able to, as an admin as well, you can enforce a lot of settings. You'd be able to prevent users from sharing data outside of the shared drive, whether that is to other people in your organization or even externally. And you can also set it so that managers are really the only people that are able to kind of, add new people to that shared drive as well. So it removes that scenario of someone new joins, they ask their colleague, hey, can you give me access to all this data, and it being overshared, has to kind of be a bit more controlled. It also really helps from an audit perspective. As I say, if you are an admin and the vast majority of your data is in shared drives, instead of having to look through all of each individual user's My Drive, you just reduce the amount of things that you need to check, basically. And the next one is consider restricting sharing to trusted domains. So within Workspace, you can create an allow list in the admin console, and these would be domains that you trust. Maybe that there's a particular team in your organization that they don't need to be, they only work with 2 or 3 different partners that you have. They don't need to share content with any domain or like a Gmail account. So if you were to create allow lists, you can then enforce those on either an OU basis or on a group basis. And it will mean that they can share externally, but only with the domains that you've specified. And again, it's just another way, following that principle of least privilege, where you're not preventing them from being able to do their job, you're just reducing the scope of the risk, really. And then preventing users from publishing files on the web. So, ultimately, I think the vast majority of users never need to do this. It is a default option, and as I say, I think you might have a marketing team or like a comms team where what they do need to legitimately have the access to publish something on the web, put it onto your website. But the vast majority of users don't need that access. And it's best to deal with it on like an exception basis. So, you can have it enabled for the users that do need to do that. But yeah, it's best practice really to have that disabled across your user base if possible. And then data loss prevention tools. So, this isn't available to all customers. And the next slide I have got, kind of, I guess, some like alternative solutions available. But the data loss prevention tools within Workspace can be really powerful and really help to prevent sensitive data from being shared out, or notify you as an admin or your security team when those types of events actually occur. So it is available to, I believe, all education customers do get access, and then also the enterprise SKU customers. So yeah, there's a lot of different options there, but ultimately you can use out the box DLP rules that would match, credit card details, social security number, passport numbers, all of the kind of typical PII data that really shouldn't be getting shared out, whether that's in Drive or via emails. But you can also create custom rules as well. So, if there's a specific project ID or really sensitive phrase that is mentioned in certain confidential files, you could create custom rules as well. So, it's another way for you to be able to get greater control without really reducing what your users can do. So it's always that balance, ease of use and security. So yeah, I was mentioning, not all customers do have access to the DLP rules. So, it isn't a like-for-like solution, but it's one to be aware of. The admin console events and the logs are very powerful. Ultimately, all activities that happen in your workspace environment, there's a log of that. That is registered in the audit log of the Google Admin Console. But being realistic, no admin or no person can really look through that log day in, day out. There's so many events that occur, when a user's editing a file, sharing it, all of the different activities that happen. But one of the things you could do, or you could consider doing, is talking to, parts of your business that are going to have access to really sensitive data. So whether that is your finance team or your HR team, and kind of asking them, hey, I know you have all of the employees' contract details, or their salaries. What files are those? And you could then, within the admin console, you can go to the audit log, and you can kind of conduct a search against that, and then you're able to configure an alert. And then when certain activities happen, so whether that is someone printing it or creating a copy of it, that's going to trigger an email to the recipient that you specified. So you could either have that email come to yourself or to your security team, or even just, that team itself to say, hey, someone's just created a lot of copies of all of your customer contracts, for example. And kind of talking about the lever scenario. If you do work in an organization where, someone's handed in their notice, they're going to a competitor, and there's a risk that they are going to take data with them when they leave, it's potentially an option for you to kind of mitigate that. You can create rules there, or you can check to see whether any of those types of activities have happened. So yeah, it's something which is really powerful. As I say, all of the events that happen are recorded there, and yeah, customers that don't have access to DLP do have the option to set up some notifications there. The other one as well is just, again, it's kind of like an end user education piece. The activity dashboard. So when you're in Google Drive and you select a file and you kind of bring up the information tab, you can see all of the different activities that happened, and it can be a quick and easy way for users to know, well, look, I can see someone's viewed this file and they're not supposed to have access to that. And as long as you kind of do that end user education piece, awareness, then it can help them to, I guess, come along on the journey and help prevent any kind of internal risks like that. So yeah, just to kind of recap, ultimately, when it comes to Google Drive security, it's permission management. That's one of the key things. So you need to conduct regular audits, and I am aware that doing audits within Google Workspace can be really challenging. It can be a bit of a black box sometimes. There's ways that you can make it easier for you as an admin. One of those being using shared drives, as I mentioned, but also the use of Google Groups is a really important way to do it as well. So if you have Google Groups for each of your teams, and you by default use those groups to share out access to shared drives or to data in My Drives, and kind of educate your users to default using Google Groups, then when it comes to that auditing activity, rather than having to look at every single individual user that has been added to a file, it kind of makes it a bit easier. Essentially, you're kind of managing groups instead of each individual user. And yeah, alerts, DLP rules, configuring anything that's going to give you more insight, more awareness as to what's going on in your environment is always going to help you as well. And yeah, repeating it again, but educating your users. And I think this next slide actually is quite relevant to the user education piece. So it's a kind of overlooked feature. It came out relatively recently, so I think it was October last year. This was made available to customers. Now all users can use this. When they're in My Drive, there's the kind of three tabs at the top. These drop-down menus, and very easily they can click on people, and they'll be able to see all of the files that are shared externally, all of the files that are shared publicly or with a specific person. So if there's a scenario where, I don't know, you're maybe ending a relationship with a particular partner or kind of like vendor, and you're moving to a different company, and you want to make sure that this old company doesn't have access to files. If users know that they can easily check this with one or two clicks, then it really kind of enables them to feel in control of the data. It's not that they need to look through and search through every individual file, navigate complex file structures. It's a really easy way for them to be able to get an idea of the sharing permissions that are set against files that they own. So look, as I say, those are some ideas, those are some suggestions and kind of recommendations in terms of what you can do to protect your workspace environment. But this is a GAT Labs webinar, so I will touch on our products and how we can help alongside some of these native controls. So just kind of going from the left-hand side there, GAT Plus, that's really that's the core of our product. It is a comprehensive auditing, alerting, reporting tool for Google Workspace. That you'll be able to get insights into every single kind of different type of permission that exists in your environment. There's really powerful filters and search rules. So, with a click of a few buttons, you can see every file that's shared externally, every file that's shared with the Gmail account, and it really gives you a lot of oversight. And in terms of that whole audit piece, it allows you to do that with a lot more ease. So you can create scheduled reports as well based off of these filters and these searches you make. So if anytime someone shares a file with a Gmail account, you want to know about it, you're able to get reports on an ongoing basis to see what file it is, who did it, when it happened. So it's a really powerful tool in terms of helping you to do that audit. And then GAT Unlock, which is effectively an add-on for GAT Plus, that is the remediation basically. So GAT Unlock allows you to whether it's in bulk or individually, manage your permissions. So make changes to your users' My Drive data, change different permissions that have been set. Maybe you want to prevent certain files that have been shared externally from being downloaded or printable, can be made copies of. You'd be able to enforce those kind of restrictions, again, just with a couple clicks of a few buttons. So these are all things that you cannot do natively in the admin console, and really are some of the key use cases for GAT Plus. And then GAT Flow, which is it's basically an automation platform. So if those in the audience use tools like GAM to kind of do some bulk activities, or kind of certain automations that you need to have happen, GAT Flow can likely cover all of those use cases. And you're able to kind of have workflows designed which are scheduled. So they just run, on a repeating basis, maybe every day or once a week. But you can also have them triggered by events. So, whether that is, a user account's been suspended, so that means they're leaving the organization. Therefore, I should do all of these different activities as part of offboarding to kind of, secure their data, but also not have to keep paying for licenses when, that they can add up. But you could also have it work alongside GAT Plus. So you could create alerts in GAT Plus that, might be whenever someone shares out a file that contains some certain sensitive data, then trigger this workflow, which could be, locking them out the account or removing the shares, or really any kind of number of things that you would want to do. There's a great deal of different actions and different conditions that you can design into GATflow. And then in terms of like outside of Google Workspace, we have a tool called GAT Shield. So this is a Chrome extension, and ultimately it gives you protections outside of the realms of Google Workspace. If a user is going into google.com or just any website and they're entering sensitive data, then you can have alerts, configured that would report that to an admin, or maybe it just closes down that tab for that user and sends them a notification to let them know that, they're doing something that is kind of against policy or, potentially dangerous. And then GAT Shield Enterprise. This is we're building on top of our existing product Shield. And this would be, maybe for larger organizations which have a use case might be like a call center where you've got high attrition staff and they're handling customer credit card details, customers' personal information. If you needed to have that additional layer of monitoring in place, and you could do screen monitoring. There's many things that you could do with that kind of product. That will be something we're bringing to the market later this year. And lastly, I know there's some education customers here, joining us today. Obviously, all of the products I've touched on here before, they are very much still relevant for Google Workspace for education customers. But we've got two particular products aimed at the education space, and that is Teacher Assist and Teacher Assignments. So Teacher Assist is kind of complements Google Classroom. It gives teachers extra control over students, so it can prevent them from maybe going off and playing games, or going onto the wrong websites, and lock them to the content that you need to run your lesson. Also gives them real-time access to the Drive files that the students are working on. And Teacher Assignments as well. This is automation in terms of the creation of the documents and the homework that is sent to the students. But it also has some really interesting features where we're able to detect whether a student's used, ChatGPT for a certain section, or if they've just copied and pasted some content from Wikipedia. And we'll be able to score with like a likelihood of, is this actually work that student has done or not? So yeah, look, I know some of those things, they're not necessarily directly related with Google Drive, but I wanted to give you a picture of, I guess, all the products that we have available.
That concludes our webinar. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed your time with us and found it insightful. To learn more, visit our website at gatlabs.com.